Well, welcome to Cracking Cases. I had the easy part. I get to introduce it, and then Alejandro and Sadie will walk us through. As I mentioned yesterday, I'll kind of reiterate that the case is really important. It's really important to our interview, and it's important to many other interviews I think you'll go through. So this is a great exercise. I think in the past folks have found it are really pretty valuable. Before we kick it off, we'll go through intros again. I mean, folks heard a lot about me, but not as much maybe about Alejandro yesterday or Sadie. So we want to spend a little bit of time, because I know you're interested in kind of the work that we do. And so we'll spend a little bit of time in that in the intros. And when the Cracking Cases is over, we'll be here for a little while. If you have any questions and want to ask any questions afterwards, we'll certainly be available. In fact, Sadie and Alejandro are here throughout the weekend. If you want to give them a call.
You're going to come here?
Yeah, we charge it. So with that, if I do this right, we're in the intros. Let me skip right to the intros and I'll turn it over. So as I mentioned yesterday, I'm John Rampula. I've been with the firm a little over 18 years, working our strategy and operations practice. My time has been predominantly working with state governments doing performance improvement, operations improvement, and a little bit of work in the higher education arena as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Alejandro and Sadie, who are far more interesting to me.
So hi, I'm Alejandro. I know yesterday I introduced myself, kind of breezed through my background, so I'll give a little bit more today. Been at the firm for 3 years, also an SNO based out of Boston. My first project was in the transportation industry. I was working with a registry of motor vehicles doing, I was registered with the registry of motor vehicles doing a lot of work in the process design, mainly with placard creation and issuance. So kind of very specific there. And then I actually moved to my current client, which is in New Hampshire, and there I've been working with their long-term care unit, mainly in the home and community-based care area. So they've gone through a wholesale of changes, and we've been helping them really where operating model and your business processes meet your technology. And I've tried to be that kind of cog in the middle that makes sure that what happens on a day-to-day basis is actually reflected in what we have in the system and something that's actually usable for people at the end. And I found that I really like that. It's an interesting place to be in the middle of the two teams, and have really focused on long-term care since.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for giving up your Friday morning to come out. So I'm Sadie Conrad, and actually Ali and I went to Maxwell together 3 years, well, graduated 3 years ago. It's been a while now. So I work in our strategy and operations practice as well. I've worked both in state government as well as higher education, but for the last 3 years off and on, I've worked primarily in the state of Georgia. They're doing a major transformation with a lot of their health and human services, bringing like a one-stop shop technology solution to customers and citizens to be able to apply for benefits. So you've got your food stamps, you've got Medicaid, the CHIP program, you've got WIC. So the state of Georgia decided to take advantage of the 90-10 funding from the federal government to really revolutionize their technology, which was really old. So being able to create this one-stop shop for folks to be able to apply for benefits. Because even though different agencies might administer them, it's really the household at the end of the day and that individual at the end of the day that is one person. So I've been on the business side. It's been a major technology transformation, but I've been on the business side to help figure out how do 6 different agencies start working together to be able to determine eligibility and deliver services to citizens. So doing everything from an as-is assessment, documenting their current business processes, what are their pain points, what's their operating model, how is their employees structured, to transformation into like a vision of what do you want the future state to look like. And then did a really cool kind of model office study to say in local lobby offices, what's the flow of traffic in and out, how do you improve these services? All the way through a technology transformation and performance monitoring in the new system. So kind of a whole range of what we do in strategy and operations I've been able to see on this one project over the course of 3 years. So that's kind of the long introduction. I've heard other people have heard that I do flying trapeze. This is a recent hobby. And some other things. Why I chose to join Deloitte. I'll be honest, I never thought I would do consulting. It wasn't something that ever crossed my mind when I was coming to Maxwell or while I was here. I just showed up to the sessions and thought, yeah, I like to solve problems. I'm interested in working in lots of different client environments. This might be something I'd be interested in. And so 3 years later, I'm still here and enjoying what I'm doing. So I like to come back and talk with students about the opportunity to work in consulting. So even if you walk away today and are like, you know what, I'm not so sure this is for me, I think what we're going to go through today is really important and valuable, helping you all to really prepare for interviews with other organizations, whether it's consulting firms. And with Deloitte, hopefully after today we'll sell you'll want to apply to Deloitte and work with all of us. But I'm really excited to see you all here today, and hopefully you'll walk away after the next couple hours saying, yeah, that was a really valuable exercise. Any questions before we get started? I used to be a teacher, so I like interaction, so feel free to jump in or raise your hand. Okay, and I think just about everybody except for a couple of folks were here yesterday, right? Okay. So the first thing is, this is how Deloitte does our interview process. So there will be a resume drop. We do a first cut through and invite people back to do case interviews. So the first interview is a shorter interview along with a behavioral interview. So that's like your typical interview. You sit down, you talk with someone, you talk about your experience. And then you also do a short case, which is what we're focused on today. After that first round, then a second group will be invited back to a longer case interview, which is about an hour. And then we extend our offers after that. So, mastering the case interview. Who here is like, I have no idea what a case interview is? Good, I'm glad, I like the honesty. I had no idea either. So, a case interview. So, when you're doing a regular interview with an organization, it's really easy to sit there and say, yeah, I'm great, I've done everything. To kind of read through your resume and get a good feel for the other person and if they're a good fit for the organization. So that's the behavioral interview. But really what a case interview does is say, in the context of a problem, can you think and communicate clearly and logically and to be able to help solve problems? Because at the end of the day, consulting is really about solving problems, being able to frame the problem and really ask the right questions. So for a case interview, it's really a good interactive session to be able to see under pressure, how does someone actually interact? How do they think? How do they communicate? So a case challenge is essentially, or a case interview is essentially just a problem that has imperfect information. So there's a problem and you need to be asking questions to figure out other context and then providing some analysis and a recommendation of what you think would be best to do for that client. So almost, I think all of our interviews are based on actual real world problems that we've had with clients, or problems that clients have asked Deloitte to come and help solve. So it consists of a challenging question with incomplete information. There's usually a small quantitative component. It's used to evaluate how you think and approach a problem, and there's no right or wrong answer. It's really all about the approach. So it's actually based on real consulting engagements. And some essentials to cracking the case is to just ask questions and to really think about how would I solve this in real life if someone came to me with this issue or problem. What's the political context? What's the operational context? What's going on with human resources or other resources, and just thinking through those different components. And making sure you articulate your assumptions so you don't just jump in and say, I know exactly what the problem is. You have to kind of back up and say, well, assuming X, Y, and Z, this is the recommendation that I would give. And it's also, it's thinking about all aspects of the client's problem. So we typically in Deloitte think about people, process, and technology. Usually any issue that's faced by our clients today has some component along those 3 dimensions. And typically the structure of our case interviews, you'll be given a scenario with some questions. And you have 5 minutes of introduction, so you want to talk to your interviewer a little bit, build a little bit of a rapport with them. You go through the introduction. You've got 20 minutes to do the analysis and answer some questions, and then 5 minutes at the end to wrap up. So that's the first one. For the second interview, if you're invited back to that second interview, it's about an hour, so it's a little bit longer, 5 minutes, and then about 40 minutes of analysis and the interview, and then 5 to 15 minutes to wrap up at the end. So the interviewer is really looking at the depth and creativity of your answers, but in addition, they're also looking at how do you do under pressure, and can you, build a rapport with the person that you're interviewing with, and can you communicate your ideas? And because we're often put in really tough client situations, is this someone that would be able to remain calm and be able to communicate clearly under pressure when working with our clients? And does anyone in here have like a business background or degree? Business students, and my sister's in business school right now, so they actually spend a lot of their time focused on case interviews because all consulting agencies really stress mastering the case interview to be able to get a job. And when you actually, if you go Google case interviews, you're going to find a lot of information on business cases, which are a little bit different than the cases that we do because it emphasizes a lot less on sort of cost analysis and increasing revenue, and a lot more about how do we actually help our clients solve specific problems, because as you all know, in like state government, you just face a lot of different realities than you do with a business. So just as a forewarning, if you go online and Google, make sure you're looking at sort of government and public sector related case interviews and challenges. Okay, so what do you need to demonstrate in the case interview? So one is just to be able to identify the problem. So you'll be read or provided with a short scenario. So can you identify the salient issues? Can you form a hypothesis and state your assumptions? And really, I would say everyone here at Maxwell, this should be something you should be able to do, because this is what we do, in and out of every class, is what are the issues, what are their problems? Can you perform data analysis? So it won't be something that you need to whip out a calculator for. Typically, you're just given a small quantitative component that just to do some sort of quick math and estimate, some cost savings or some projected revenue down the road for the client. But it's not something that would require really extensive analysis. And then communication skills, again, being able to listen carefully, to speak clearly and concisely, to support your hypothesis, and to just not lose your cool when interviewing with somebody, and to logically process. And can you logically process what's going on? So using a framework, typically I like using people, process, and technology to say, okay, did I actually address all of those components in this case? Or even a SWOT analysis to say, okay, what's the strengths and weaknesses here? Where are some opportunities? What are some threats? So really you coming in with some sort of framework just to help you remember all the different components you need to think about. And then are you comfortable with complex issues and imperfect information? So being creative and saying, well, I don't know information here, but here's a reasonable assumption I can make, and to just be able to think under pressure. So I feel like this sounds really scary, but when I went in to do my interview, I did a lot of prep work for a couple of weeks. I looked online, read some cases, but I went in and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to have fun with this and think about how would I actually approach this if I was really asked to help solve this problem. And for me, that was a lot more helpful than feeling like, oh my gosh, I need to get the right answer, because I wanted to demonstrate to my interviewers that I could at least think through the problem. And it actually is kind of fun to think about, this is a real world problem or scenario. How would I actually go about solving it? Okay, any questions so far? Is it still kind of all vague? Yes. Thank you. Yeah, well, we'll go through an example approach that you can take, and then we'll actually do some practice and some interactive part of the session. So I'll hand it over to Ollie to talk through an example approach.
So Sadie mentioned, now we're going to just walk through how to approach the case interview. Hopefully by the end of this, and then walking through an example, it'll be a little bit clearer, like what the case actually is, what does it look like, how is it structured, how do I go in and approach it, and you'll feel a little bit more comfortable walking into that room that day. So we really recommend a 4-step approach in general to the case interviews. You want to first make sure you identify the problem, right? Then you want to make sure you think logically through the solution. So like, how am I going to approach giving a response to this problem or issue that I'm faced with? You're going to want to analyze the data, make sure that you do your math right, make sure that you have all the information that you need, and then come up with a actionable answer. Communicate your plan effectively. If it's 1, 2, 3, make sure you say, okay, I think you should do these 3 things. 1, this is what you should do, then this is why, 2, and so on and so forth. In order to actually show that you were able to think through the issue, take in all the information and then break it down to the point where the client actually cared about what your response is. So on one side, you definitely want to make sure that you get the case information correct, right? You want to make sure that you approach it correctly. But we also want to see your personality come through it. One of the things that once I was working at Deloitte, I realized about the case is it's not just about making sure that you guys can think through things, but it's making sure that you're comfortable being in front of a client and working with them collaboratively to solve an issue and being able to go back and forth to ask those questions, to have that presence, to make sure that they feel comfortable that your recommendations are something that are valid and do have a leg to stand on. Finally, Sadie mentioned this, there is usually a quantitative element to the case interview. Not something to be super scared about. It's really, usually numbers are in the millions, but it's 54 million plus 8 million, right? It's nothing that you're going to have to take out your graphic calculator, right, and do a differential equation or anything like that. So you should be perfectly okay with that. So the first thing you're going to want to do is identify the problem. You want to very quickly try to determine what the case is about. Off the bat, there is going to be a bunch of information that's given to you. The temptation, and this is definitely a temptation that I had and still have, is, this sounds interesting, and then going down a rabbit hole. You want to try to avoid that. Make sure that you understand what is it about. Is this about a technology improvement? Is this about cost reduction? And then zone in on that. A good way to do that is listen to all the information, process it, and then speak it back to the interviewer, right? So they say, this issue is about X, Y, Z. And you're like, oh, okay, well, my understanding is that this issue is about X, Y, Z, and then make sure that you're actually on the right track and tackling what they want you to tackle and not what you think is important or salient about the issue. From the get-go, make sure you start writing down key facts. That's going to be important as you move on to determining what your framework is going to be and determining what your approach is going to be, to make sure that you have all the information that you think you need in order to make an assessment. Identify the issue, and then you can move on to actually thinking through the framework that you're going to use. So, so the second issue is going to be, or the second step, sorry, is going to be deciding on what framework you're going to use. I know Sadie mentioned people process technology. That's a very popular framework to use, especially within the public sector, because a lot of the times when a public sector agency is faced with a challenge, you have this multifaceted nature, right? And you want to make sure you address how does this affect the way the people are going to be interacting with the clients, how is it going to affect our process, and what does this mean for our technology? But that's not the only one. So when you're thinking through things logically, the first thing you're going to do is, or you want to do is clarify anything you find ambiguous. So for all cases, there is information that they're going to give you up front, and then there's other information that is probably going to be very helpful to you that they're not going to give you up front. So take the time to think through the issue, and then try to find those key pieces of information and ask about them. And when you don't have them, state your assumption. So say, hey, I'm assuming that these 3 things are true because I believe that's the reality of the world, right? And these are reasonable assumptions, and because of this, I will go ahead and do this. So make sure that the interviewer really understands where you're coming from and what it is that you're thinking through, so that when you give, at the end, your recommendation, they're not like, whoa, that's super out of left field. I don't know how you got there. Once you've kind of figured out you have all the information and you feel comfortable, take some time to legitimately, and you, like, I remember in my interview, I said this, I was like, okay, thank you, I have all the information. Now, if you don't mind, I'm gonna take like 10 minutes to just think through my recommendations. And then that's when you really like get down to the third step, which is analyzing data and do your analysis and think through your solution. So before we talk about analyzing the data, just wanted to go through a couple other frameworks that you guys might want to use. Don't think of the framework as a way to get the answer, but think of it as a way to make sure that you're addressing all the facets of the issue that's being presented to you, right? So it's not like, oh, we're going to give you case A, and case A, you really need to use the 4 C's framework in order to resolve, and if you use PPT, you're not going to get it right. That's not the case. It's more because of the nature of the issue and the framework that I feel comfortable with, how can I think through this and make sure that I address all the facets? So we talked about people, process, technology, so I'm just going to kind of skip through that. The cost model, so if it was some sort of cost reduction framework, or cost reduction issue, sorry, you might want to use the cost model and try to figure out where the money can be the most profitable, give your recommendations based on that. Strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, the SWOT analysis. I'm assuming most of you know what a SWOT analysis is, right? Thinking through, okay, this is the issue, what are the strengths, where are the possible weaknesses, where are my opportunities, and what do I have to address, what threats do I have to counter to make sure that this strategy is actually successful. And then the 4 C's, I actually hadn't seen the 4 C's until I started at Deloitte, so I'm assuming no one else sees this either. But that's the constituents, costs, competitors, and capabilities. So that helps you develop a course of action, taking into consideration the different constituents and the different things around your suggestion. That's going to help you move forward. So once you've decided the framework, you have all your information, then the next thing is really going to be pen to paper, analyzing the data. Once again, the data isn't going to be super tough to analyze, but what you want to make sure you do here is take the time to understand everything that's in front of you, and then take the time to formulate the approach to giving your answer, right? So do your math, whatnot, and then literally talk through out loud how you're going about decomposing this issue, because that'll be really helpful for the interviewer when at the end you're giving the recommendation to really see like your train of thought, right? Like I gave you this information, then you decided to use this framework, and because you were thinking about people, process, technology, these are the things that you were thinking about when giving the answer, and these are your recommendations. So it's completely transparent, and they've walked you through the process, and then they, A, know that you can walk through a framework from start to end, and B, are not surprised by the recommendation that you give once you finalize it. Yeah.
The point out 100 made is really important, and I've done a lot of case interviews over the years, is that there's really a tendency to kind of move directly to your recommendation. Because quite often you're going to be asked to make a recommendation, but as Sadie talked about, as Alejandro just mentioned, communicating your approach is really important, because what we want to do is not kind of think about what framework you apply, but understand how you apply the framework. What approach did you use? So, I mean, this is a really important step, as well as after the slash, articulating your reasonable assumptions. Because we're, as Sadie mentioned, we're not as concerned about the answer there at the end, kind of how you got there, and kind of understanding how you got there, the assumptions you made, are really important to kind of give us some insight as to your reasoning process.
Yeah, no, and that is a good point. And for me personally, that helps take a little bit of the pressure off, right? Because there's not, like Sadie mentioned, you're not going to come in and say, it's 60 million, and they're like, nope, sorry, it was 55.5. It's more about, do I understand the issue and can I walk through it? And that's something that we as Maxwell students / alums have done in the past in multiple classes, right? That's how we break down issues, whether it be regarding health policy or education policy or anything like that. That is something that we know how to do, so it makes you feel a little more comfortable with it.
One other real quick, I didn't see it yet. One other real quick point is, the other thing that does, and also the step 1 piece when you're reciting the facts of the case and asking any questions, is it's an easy way to start to build rapport, and I think, anyway, an easy way for you to start to reduce the stress, because you're going to be really stressed. There's a time frame. There's someone who you don't know across the table, and you're just going to feel a lot of stress. Building rapport early on, having the person across the table kind of nod and acknowledge, yeah, you got the facts right. You got the question. And it's really easy to do, right? So I think it helps build your confidence. This is another step that I think, step 3, where if you start with the approach, helps again kind of establishing, building that rapport. And I think building your own confidence, because most of the folks that you're going to interview with, you'll get some nonverbal cues. We just do, because very few of us are kind of like totally like stone walls. And I think it really does help. It helps us, but I think it really does help you as well with that stress component of it and the building rapport, which really, my goal in all this is kind of deflate the stress, because you can take that away. There's not a person here who can't tackle any case that you might get.
Oh, I was just going to mention that I actually remember in my first case interview, I got the math component wrong at the end, but what I had done was I walked through exactly what I did, that at the end my interviewer said, okay, double check what you just did there, because I had gotten it all right, but I just did a weird multiplication error at the end. I was like, oh, and I caught it right away. But because I had walked her through what I did, she knew I had just made a small error at the end and didn't totally get the wrong approach altogether. So it was one of those things I was kind of flustered, like, oh no, I got it wrong. But really, because I had gotten all the steps right, it was able to pinpoint exactly, a little off track, but just had to back up and check. But if I had not walked her through what I had said, she just would have been like, okay, Sadie can't add.
Yeah. Or wouldn't have been able to figure out what it is, like how you got to that answer, right? Like,
yeah.
It's that transparency piece is important. I mean, John's a reasonable guy. Like, everybody understands, like, it's a stressful situation, right? It's an interview. So building that rapport early, showing your process is important to them, being able to maybe give you, like, a little bit of help and saying that, oh, like, you added these 2 things wrong, or you multiplied these 2 things wrong. So as part of analyzing the data, you also want to start thinking about the last step, which is going to be communicating your plan or communicating your answer. With the communication piece, it's, once again, not necessarily about the content itself of what you're delivering. Like, there are more reasonable and less reasonable assumptions, but it's not necessarily the right or wrong answer, but how you actually present that information, right? The case interview is a mock scenario of you walking a client through an issue and then presenting recommendations. So just like the client would expect you to say, okay, I know your scenario, I understand it, these are the things that are affecting it, and then this is why it matters to you, and this is what you should do. The interviewer is going to expect a similar breakdown of, okay, now these are the recommendations, this is why I made them, and if there's an order to them, or if there's any other information, like to actually communicate that. Yep, so that is really basically it. Staying calm, important, building that rapport, important, and once again, walking through, being transparent. Any questions or any other comments before we move on to the practice?
One comment that doesn't come immediately clear in the frameworks you hear that's important as well is think about any barriers or constraints to your potential recommendation. Remember yesterday we talked about human capital practice and the importance of change management. If it's not overtly asked, you're likely to get the question about, because a lot of times this is a role play. So I'll be playing the role of a client. I'll ask, how am I going to make this happen, right? Or asking you, Deloitte, do you see any potential roadblocks along the way? So think about barriers, constraints, risks, and how you may mitigate them.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like, expect follow-up questions. Don't feel like because someone is pressing on an issue or someone is asking a follow-up or the interview is asking a follow-up that you missed something or they did something wrong. For the most part, it's them trying to make sure that you understood the issue completely and not that you just like said something that sounded good and didn't really understand why you were saying that. So it's a good way to continue the conversation, and don't be flustered if you get them. Any questions? I think next is the sample.
Yeah, I can say that's still kind of vague. Okay, so what we want to do is walk through just a sample case. It's actually been abbreviated a little bit, but what I want to do is group up, I think, into 3s and have people, we'll kind of run through the case, have you discuss the answers and come back and just tell us what your you're coming up with. So I think we can break into 3 if people just want to try and group up around them real quick. I'll give you all like 1 minute. Or 4, whatever is easiest.
It's not a hard number. You could do 3, 4, 5. That's fine.
You say it sounds like law school.
Yeah. Kind of. It sounds like. All right.
Law school, yeah, and business school too. They all use case challenge interviews. My sister went through all this last year, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's intense.
It's a little bit different of an approach to the case challenge, but yeah.
I guess it's acceptable. You're fine. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read it. It'll be up here on the board. As if you were in a real interview with someone, go ahead and take down a few notes. Don't try and write down every single thing, but just the important facts that pop out at you. So, business situation. A National Labor and Population Statistics Agency conducts a survey every 10 years that collects data on every household in the country. I wonder what agency this is. This data is used for congressional apportionment and funds allocation to state and local governments. Recently, this agency's budget has been reduced, but its operational costs have skyrocketed year over year. Key considerations. The agency has been proactively looking for ways to gain control of its costs while maintaining the same high quality of data collected. There is a tremendous amount of oversight and pressure to improve the way the agency does business. However, the agency is extremely risk adverse, as its activities are highly consequential. Any changes made within the agency needs to be fail-safe. The agency has hired Deloitte Consulting to analyze its business strategy and operations to determine the cause of these increasing costs and to develop comprehensive recommendations for improvement. So I'd like you all to talk for just maybe about 1 minute in your group. Can you identify what's the problem statement? You can summarize the problem statement. But talk in your group first, and I'll get each person to go around. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take a volunteer. Does anyone want to volunteer their answer? What's the problem statement? Yes, back there.
I think increasing the cost of the agency and increasing the revenues, finding ways in which the agency can reduce its cost and increase its revenues.
Close. So that's part of, I think, what they're looking for Deloitte to do is to help provide that answer. But you're just about there. I think you're missing just a little bit of the actual problem statement instead of jumping straight to what Deloitte's being asked to do. You're close, though. So increasing revenues and reducing costs. Anyone else have anything a little bit different? Yes.
So the budget is going down while costs are going up, and public scrutiny is going up as well to maintain high standards.
Mm-hmm. I would say that piece of that their budget's being reduced. Yeah, that was one piece. Anything over here that's a little bit different? Yes.
It seems like the agency needs to be able to make their data collection more efficient. Like their problem is efficiency.
More cost effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a really good jump into what your hypothesis is. Oh. Yes.
So jump the gun a bit.
Jump the gun a bit, but you're like on the right track. So I would say, even kind of backing up a little bit more, you would want to say, what's your sample response? And you are all right about on the same page. So the agency is experiencing reduced funding, while at the same time the cost of operations is continuing to increase. The agency needs a comprehensive recommendation on how to reduce costs while at the same time maintaining quality of service. So there could be an increasing revenue component to it potentially, but that also is an assumption that we haven't presented you with here too. So it's partly just thinking through what is it exactly that I've been told and thinking through, okay, so I automatically want to go this direction. I need to kind of check my facts and ask questions to get there. John, do you have anything?
It's a bit of a tangent, but if you remember back to yesterday when we were talking about how states procure services usually from the request for proposals process, they usually tell us how they want the response structured. And in many states we work in, we actually, part of the points we get in evaluation is based on our statement of the problem. It's either a statement of the problem or problem statement. And I will tell you that it was one of the first things I was ever assigned as a consultant, because it should be easy, but it's incredibly hard to write it kind of insightfully. So this not only is important for the case study, but it's not uncommon for a state in the procurement process to ask us to state to them what we see the problem or issue being.
Yeah. And formulating this is also one of the important pieces of not making sure you don't go down a rabbit hole, right? Because if you agree on what the problem statement is, then from there it flows you can agree on what the answer should be centered around. So it is, you don't have to get 100% right, but it's important that you and the interviewer agree, this is what the problem statement actually is.
And I remember thinking, well, I'm just regurgitating back to you what you told me, but that's part of, can you do that? Can you listen, think critically, and then repeat back what I told you the problem is too? Okay, what additional information do you need? So I want each group to actually take about 5 minutes to think, if you were sitting in the interview, what would you be asking this agency about? What additional information do you need to feel like you can come up with some good recommendations for them? So go ahead and take 5 minutes, and then I'll have each group volunteer some questions.
Kind of conversation.
Let's start talking.
Right? I'm like, oh, okay. And it was something small, but literally. I don't know.
You have to worry about
Good God.
Yeah, there's Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and pull people back together. Okay, so what are some of the questions that you would want to ask the interviewer? Someone wants to volunteer one question? Over here?
What are your costs of operations?
What are your cost of operations? Yep. And how are they bucketed?
What is sort of where are your costs rising? What are these cost drivers that are causing the problem?
Yep. What are the cost drivers? Yep.
How do you measure quality of service?
How do you measure quality of service? Good question. Yes.
Breakup of their cost and the commensurate revenues that they are getting in relation to the cost that they are incurring.
Yeah, so where are your cost drivers? Are you getting any other revenues? So we know that they get funding from the government, but is there any other way that they're getting any sort of revenue?
I would also ask for them the process map of how this overall activity happens, so that I can find out possibly what are the value adding activities and what are the non-value adding activities, and try to reduce them in my recommendation process.
And remember, what is the primary thing that this agency does?
Survey households.
Survey households, yep. So what's your business process for surveying households? Mm-hmm. Anything else you'd want to ask about? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the stakeholders? Yep.
So, would it be appropriate to ask if there were other funding options? Like, I don't know if it's a block grant or like a line item. Like,
Yeah.
there might be other ways to get.
Absolutely, I think that's a fair question. You could say, are there other options for giving funding?
Or
Is it
have you
block
looked at
grant?
any other options?
Yep. What are they?
Is it the first time that the agency is facing a cut in their funding? Has it ever done in past? And if it has been done in past, how the agency has managed that and continued?
Have you dealt with this in the past?
Yes.
It probably falls under process map, but the technologies that they're using right now.
Thank you. I was waiting for someone to get the T part of it. What technology are you using right now to do this survey? Is it literally pen and paper and you're going door to door? Are you sending emails? What are you doing? Yeah. There were a couple more hands over here.
I just want to know, why was the budget cut? Like what is Congress saying you're not worth it for?
We know that they've been under increased pressure to change their operations. Why? What's kind of come out? What's that pressure coming from? Yep, we're here.
I was going to ask if there are any newer things that you need to pursue this year that's different than other years.
Yeah. What have you been mandated to deliver? So I'm going to kind of pull it back for a second. So in a case interview, the interviewer who's acting as a client has the situation, and all of these questions they might not actually have answers to, but it's good to demonstrate what you're thinking about. And in addition, they've been instructed to only give pieces of information if you ask certain types of questions. So if you're not thinking through the whole context, you might miss the opportunity to have some information that would help you get through the case. So this is exactly the type of thing that we would want you to go through to say, what kind of questions do I need to be asking?
Yeah, and even if they don't have the answer, one of the things that's important to that is if you had a question about something that you think is important, that's probably an important assumption to state that you're making, right? If you think that ROI based on the cost and what you're spending your money on is important, then when you're making a recommendation, say what you're assuming your ROI scenario is. Are all things else equal, or is something different that's leading you to a different answer? So we have in the cases specific sets of information, but just because you ask the question that's not answered within the information that we have doesn't mean it wasn't important or valuable to study.
Do you have anything else, Don?
I think the only thing I'd add to that is in asking your questions, be cognizant of the time. I've been in interviews where folks have asked questions for probably half the time, and then they kind of get crunched at the back end. So, think about the questions that are going to provide you with the insights you most need to kind of head down the path. At times I felt in the past like some folks thought if they asked enough questions, we would devolve, we'd provide the answer. So there's a bit of a balance there, because all the while, again, think about the time and how much time you might want to allocate to your questions.
Mm-hmm. So in a 30-minute shorter case interview, so you've got 5 minutes at the beginning and the end to wrap up, you've got 20 minutes to effectively solve the case. I would say formulate your questions for a couple of minutes and maybe up to 5 minutes of sort of discussion back and forth. But if they say not relevant or move on, it just means okay, that's not really part of the area you need to be jumping down. But I would say you want to be thinking in all those areas. The one other thing I think we missed a little bit was what does their labor force look like? And you would have gotten that a little bit from what are your cost drivers, but saying what's the demographic of your labor force? Do you have a whole bunch of folks that are about to hit retirement? Do you have a bunch of new folks that are in the organization? Do you have high turnover so that the cost of training new people is really high? All those types of things are things that state agencies are really struggling with right now.
Can we add to it the question on the structure itself? How the structure of that agency is?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. How are they structured? So, for instance, we just provided one, and actually, I missed this in the beginning, but the costs of operation have grown since 1970. So just understanding how have demographic changes changed between 1970 and now 2010? How are costs rising? A great answer would be, let us understand what's the changes in demographics. So also, we're surveying households. How have households changed over the last several decades? Okay, so through client interviews, you are provided with several additional pieces of information. So surveying methodology has not changed significantly since 1970. It's a mail out, mail back enumeration with in-person follow-ups to households who did not mail back the questionnaire. Limited introduction of telephone response channels in recent decades. On average, up to 6 in-person attempts are made to contact each household during non-response follow-ups. The internet has not been widely used due to security and privacy concerns. So this is the information you got from the questions that you asked. You're also provided with the following data. So a senior official stated that achieving 2000 cost levels is a major goal. The real dollar per housing unit cost, so in 2009 dollars for the agency, has increased more than 600%. So you're given this information. So from 1970 up to 2010, because this is done every 10 years, cost per housing unit went from $17 per household to $115 per household. Your population grew from 203 billion in 1970 to 301 billion in 2010. And the life cycle cost in 2009 real dollars went from 1.2 billion in 1970 to 14.7 billion in 2010. So the following are the major cost drivers for 2010. Headquarters staff at $3 billion. Non-response follow-up costs $2.8 billion. Local field office costs $1.3 billion. Paper phone response digitization costs just under $1 billion at $981 million. And your regional field offices cost $828 million, so just under $1 billion as well. What steps would you take to try to address the cost drivers? So here's the question. I want you all to go ahead and talk again for about 5 to 10 minutes. I'll throw it back on this slide. If anyone needs me to go back, feel free to let me know. So you have about 5 to 10 minutes.
So I would want to know what the success rate is of
So like, show up to your house.
yeah, on this, it said that there was like 6 attempts. Like, there's not much time they sent to me in person of the 6 times. So I'd like to know what the response rate is after the first person that was in, because you might be able to cut that in half.
Or not send people automatically to someone. Not to get a thing like
Well,
they
there
send
are
you
lots of
know,
options.
people.
Well, I know. So, if H, that is what we're looking at in regard to what the workforce is like. Are they looking at less people? Are they spending so much money to train people because they don't want it? And then with regard to Niles on follow-up, like we just said, like what's the percentage of success? With regard to like you send someone like 6 times, then maybe like the 3rd time you have like 50%, but like the 6th time maybe it's like 3%.
You could
Where are those field offices?
I have no idea how many.
So yeah, like that's something you
Are they
you have to figure out like how to map out where's the most efficient.
Automated hiring.
Yeah,
I do that.
I would need
That's just quite cheap. So,
I would estimate more to say something so we could
we
reduce costs
sometimes
for others.
alternate by rate.
So do we want to reduce to 70 perhaps? It says that people say they're keeping the 2,000 cost level.
you want to shoot 2,000 costs. That's the only way you could do
Just automating.
and like cutting in how you like the only thing you want like not everybody has broad attention.
I know.
So you need people to be able to do the
I think it's like a
I've written many years ago.
I think you're actually
Really the template.
You know how like you need people to do that and like, I mean, that you want to need that if you you just have really
but we have to train.
You know what? I never used it out, but
I
Liz from Ohio, translated by Sadie.
I was talking with Rom.
I don't want to.
Okay. I really like Rom a lot.
Yeah, he's out of the lot. More on the analytical side. We've been very sort of driven. He's like, we needed that balance more folks.
Yeah. Did you take the work
Additional. David.
Even if we're somehow.
I feel like we're doing a lot of, I mean, Roy and
I'll figure out how much.
Yeah, I think that they're doing. I'll know more. I mean, David sent me like 4 paragraphs.
You know the best piece of advice I ever got actually is like start with up here at the top. What do you want from me?
But block was whether I email you back. Bottom line up front.
Yeah.
So you'd open an email and it would say, sort of felt to make your son so block, and that would be it. Because out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
I like that.
Like, I don't even know how you guys manage
Something
it.
else.
I'm,
Something
like,
else.
overwhelmed with that.
There's got to be other things. Unless they're adding some significant cost.
There's an RPA opportunity there. And all the. Let me jump on it.
And then
Chris would probably love that, to be honest.
And the thing is, like, the intro, like, presentation, how are you doing? And, like, I was talking about, like, okay, I have to do that, but then part of it is, like, it's hard to the point. I'm like, Allie, I need to remind you.
Oh, I know.
I care, but you know.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple more minutes. In case y'all forgot, here's the question. What steps did you try to take to address the cost drivers? We'll give about 2 more minutes and then we'll come back.
Yeah.
We'll go back a couple slides.
Wait, on average,
Yeah.
does that mean the average is 6 or the average on each year? What does that mean?
It depends on the region, how many. I honestly don't know. Don't focus too much. You can just say average 6 attempts are made per household.
Mailbag questionnaire, so like,
Well, if we're going to do that, how do we address this?
cybersecurity. Yeah, I mean, you have to limit. If you're not asking for it, you have to figure out.
We don't bring any undergrads in directly from the public sector state. The undergrads we bring in that they can head out there. I did down there.
So federal avails
undergraduates, state.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and come back. Anyone offer some other recommendations or potential steps? Yes.
Reduce the number of average follow-ups from 6 to 3.
How would you do that while maintaining quality?
Maintaining quality.
So if you
Also diversifying the way in which you reach out to people.
yeah, so maybe yep.
So instead of just mail, email, text, social media.
You're basically reducing the need for follow-ups in general. So getting people to respond to the initial letter, and then there's a lot of different steps you can take with that.
Great, over here.
I have another clarifying question about what are their concerns with regard to the privacy of the email, and how do we I would want to address that, because I feel like that could take a lot of the costs away, but I need to know where the concern's coming from.
So your assumption is part of the reason they haven't gone digital is because they're concerned about privacy and safety of the data.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a good assumption and a good question to ask.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
One thing something that I thought about is not all of America has uniform broadband, so it might make sense in some cases to have the field offices and all this and still run manually. So my thought process is that in places that are concentrated and have quality internet, maybe remove some field offices in favor of one regional one, but for places more sparsely populated, keep those regional field offices.
So I like the thought process. I would back up a little bit to say, okay, you have a footprint, right? So you've got local field offices, have a $1.3 billion footprint. Could you go virtually? Thinking through possible solutions around meeting like that cost. Is that where you're headed?
Possibly. One thing I also said was just running an experiment with that. Like maybe randomly selecting, okay, this area we'll keep the field office. Oh, this area we won't, and we'll see either security-wise or financially what happens.
Do you see any risks in doing that with one of the years of going out to collect data to run an experiment?
Well, one of the big concerns was security. What if we go online and someone hacks us? It can very much happen.
Yeah, so absolutely. I think we're thinking through the right issues here. You just want to make sure you're thinking through, if I'm going to propose that we have an experiment, what would an agency's reaction actually be to that? Okay, are we talking about a small sample of a county this year? You know, because if I'm going to have half of my offices go through an experiment 1 year, that actually sounds very sort of, I would be nervous as an agency accountable to Congress, be like, well, we'll see what's going to happen this year. So part of it's just like kind of framing about what's my actual recommendation. Yeah, but I think you're thinking down the right track around local office. How much are we paying to maintain brick and mortar? Yep.
First of all, the population has increased only by 48% from 1970 to 2010, whereas the cost has increased by around 600%. So that is not at all commensurate with what they are doing. Something is really wrong with their functioning. I would give a recommendation to the agency that use more of a technology, because if we are not able to put in the security and safety feature in the technology, that is not a fault of the technology. That is a fault that we are not able to secure it. All of us make online payment these days. We are sure that there is no default that is taking place. It means the safety and security exist, and we need to just put that thing along with the data that we are collecting from the household, so that follow-up cost, that paper phone response digitization and non-response follow-up cost will go down drastically. And if we go in the automation, process automation, so that will reduce all of the cost other than the headquarter cost. And even in the headquarter cost, we can bring robotics. It's like common most of these days, and maybe for an initial period it will increase the cost, but over a period of time the cost will come down.
So just to paraphrase, the primary cost drivers are paper and
response follow, non-response follow.
Response follow-up, yep. And that the recommendation is that you need to go digital, and the assumption there is that's going to reduce your costs. Yes. And that the agency is probably concerned about safety and security, but there are ways to overcome those barriers.
So, and there'd be a spike initially, potentially, if you go digital, right? There's also a price tag attached to security. The more secure I am, the more costly as well. So I think we have to balance that with some of the scrutiny they're getting from Congress, right? So.
Yep. With regard to the scrutiny they're getting from Congress, before I recommend that they cut it from 6 to 3, I would ask like what the the effectiveness of the non-response follow-up. So like they send one, okay, is it like 50%? And then once you get to 5, are you only getting like 2% response?
Yeah.
And I feel like that would make it easier for me to explain or like back up why I think they should cut it. So that would be a clarification I would like.
Yeah, what's your marginal benefit from the cost of sending someone else out to actually getting that response back? Yep.
Adding to thinking on other lines, I would also want to know like what's the difference between local field office and regional field offices, and would want to see if there's an overlap of work happening from there and how the processes are mapped there, because that's also local, that's regional. I understand local and regional could be different, but can we reduce manpower at a level and have a direct work relationship? So that can also impact in terms of straight away cost reduction, but that has to be looked into whether it's feasible or not.
Yes, I think you might be the first person to actually say like labor and manpower being a primary cost driver. Yeah, so going and doing the field. We've all kind of talked about it, but no one's really explicitly stated that as probably a primary cost driver. Yeah. So again, all of you are thinking about the same thing. It's also just kind of learning how do I break it down and not just give. So what I just did is paraphrase a lot of what you guys gave me. Your interviewer is not necessarily going to do that. So thinking through how do I sort of communicate, here's the problem, here's where I think you're going to have potential opportunities or barriers. Here's what I think the agency is going to come back with. Well, we're worried about security. You know, here's how you could overcome it. We know banks and everybody's doing financial online transactions. There's no reason you couldn't do that. There might be a large investment initially, so how do you help the agency through tackling that? Anything else that I might have missed? Other recommendations that you all would have given? Yes?
Yeah, I'm looking at the follow-up. What is the percentage of non-response? Because it is huge, then you may need that number of staff. But if it is marginal, it can be a good point, and then the conclusion can be made.
Yeah, one of the big pieces we're missing here is like what is actually a non-response rate. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, so we were coming up to the assumption that the follow-up response cost is affecting also the local and regional costs because of the staff that you might need. So we assume that if you cut down the response, you also cut down the cost in all 3 sections.
I think that's a reasonable assumption. Do you have something else?
Just a way of, I guess, selling it or whatever is the technology. Like, what is the non-response rate for these in-person and mail visits? Like, there may actually be a benefit to going digital. You might get higher quality data. So not only are we maintaining, we're actually increasing the quality, I guess, of the product.
Yeah, just put a Facebook survey up there.
Exactly.
those are right?
No, just kidding. But yeah, exactly. So all those assumptions of your cost drivers are because you can't get them initially. How do you improve them initially? Okay, one more.
So although also one more point could be that if we have a number of different kind of recommendations, we may want to do a kind of pilot and phase out our solutions. Like if you're introducing technology, maybe then first technology and keeping other variables constant so that we know what's the change of one factor happening rather than introducing all 4 or 5 of them together and we don't know what's the relationship happening.
Yeah.
So then maybe on the manpower, we can tackle the manpower issue and then the process mapping issue. So maybe we can go in a phase-wise manner.
And I think that's what you're getting to with the experiment around a pilot first for the first round as well. I think that's kind of a second step of how would you actually implement this. You could say if the agency is not willing to do a major transformation because there's higher risks involved, you could start with a pilot. Yeah. Okay, so one example, a good answer would be it's related to labor and then assess growth rate of overall employee payroll as well, all those follow-up visits. The great answer, which I think you all hit on, is like introduce internet, reducing the need for like multiple follow-up visits and major cost factors, minimizing demand on local and regional labor, and minimizing redundancy. Okay, here's the math part. So if you reduced life cycle costs by 10% between 2010 and 2020, and by 28% between 2020 and 2030, what would your total life cycle cost be in 2030? Would these reductions be enough to take the agency back to pre-2000 cost levels? So I'm going to go ahead and throw up this. And I will say, it's not as hard as it probably seems with the way it's written. Yes.
Question, is this going to be a question that's posed to us at some point during the case?
Yeah, so you definitely in the case interview will get a quantitative component like this, and it will ask you to assume, whether it's cost reduction or increasing revenue, and you'll have to do something similar to this in the in the actual case.
Yeah, I got a question earlier. This is actually a bit skinny down, but this is the type of case you could expect in terms of facts and quantitative for the shorter case on day one.
And where in the process are those questions posed? Does that make sense?
So in the short interview, do you read all the questions up front?
I do. It's really the interviewer's discretion.
Yeah.
Quite often what I do is I wait to ask the quantitative question. And I probably change this up this year because we're getting more and more interested in quantitative skills as our clients are, as I mentioned yesterday. So this year, I used to save this to the end because I didn't want to add any additional stress. I was more interested in how you got through the fact pattern and the recommendations. This likely will be embedded, and I like to give all the questions up front. That way you've got it all up front. It helps you manage your time better. I'm likely to include this one this year. And some interviewers, though, will ask you like one question at a time. I like to ask them all up front.
So be prepared for either style. Yeah. And I think for the short interview, it's like 3 or 4. It's not too many.
There aren't too many questions to tackle in the time frame. Yeah.
So go ahead and give.
Yeah, we try to not overwhelm you with the questions.
Is that 3 or 4 quantitative questions, or just general?
You'll get one quantitative question.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then just to follow up, is that the first interview in person as well? Okay.
Mm-hmm. So I think we'll follow the same process this year, but typically for the first round of interviews, so after the resume drop, folks will be invited back for the interview. For the short case interview, you'll just have one person who acts as the client, giving you the scenario. And then you'll be one-on-one with a behavioral interview. And then for the second round, it's usually you and 2 Deloitte practitioners. Okay, so I'll go ahead and give y'all maybe 10 minutes on this one. Okay, how about 2 minutes? We'll do 5. We'll do 5.
They're not going to so like 10%. 10% of 14.7. Why I don't know. Are we supposed to just what did you get? Can we ask a point of question? So, are we supposed to assume that in 2020 there is no increase by itself? Like, or are we supposed to like calculate what's different than previous year?
Total costs or just?
So you could probably assume similar rates of growth.
Okay.
Just staying on par. So where they are.
So you're assuming the same.
2010 to 2020. I'll give you a hint. You're really just supposed to focus mostly on this number.
Yeah, that's what I did.
That's not crazy.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't, we're not taking, I'm talking about your.
Oh.
I mean,
Actually, go ahead and just pretend it's the same. It'll be the same in 2010 versus 2020. That might be easier. Did you all hear that? Just assume this would be the number that it would be for 2020, the 14.7.
Wait, we're I thought there's a 10% reduction.
But if you.
Okay.
We have negative inflation then. Well, that's real dollars. So we can't control that.
I want to go down that route.
We're at 5 minutes, we'll go ahead and go through this. I will admit, for me, when I was doing this, when I was doing some prep before doing the case interview, I'm like, I have never taken a business class in my life, and I just needed to refresh my brain on how to do math, but like, what do these terms mean? It was really helpful for me just to do a few of these kind of exercises to be like, okay, when I think about in terms of like reducing costs or life cycle costs, what do I need to pay attention to? So pretty much, and this is why I was saying just focus on the 14.7 billion, not increased rate. So life cycle costs, if you reduce it by 10%, you're at 1.47 billion. In terms of the second part of that, so you'd be saving, it would be 13.23 billion 2020 cost estimate then if you reduced it by 10%. And then the second part of that question is what's the 2030 life cycle cost? So reducing by 20% that number. So then you're at 2.64 billion. So subtract that from 13.2. So again, this is why it's all in 2009 dollars. So you don't have to do sort of any inflation. So compared to the 2000 cost level, you're at 10.56 billion would be your estimated cost for 2030. Minus out what's your 2000 cost level is 8.1 billion. So you're still above what the 2000 cost level would be. So the answer would be no.
This is the assumption that there is no increase in any kind of rate.
No additional increase, that it was static. Yeah, and I apologize, we didn't write on the slide, but that's what I mentioned right at the end, is just assume that's static at the 2010 level. Yeah. But pretty much part of that can be just saying, can you clarify for us, are we assuming there's increased growth after 2010, or do I assume that's the number that we're projecting for 2020 as well? Okay. So, following kind of similar pattern, that's typically your second to last question is the quantitative piece, unless you have a really nice interviewer who saves it towards the end. We kind of talked about this earlier, but summarize for me what your key recommendations would be to address the problem. And maybe give y'all about 5 minutes, and then we'll have each group tell us what your final recommendations are.
High quality in spite of.
You're welcome to wrap it up. So that you could.
Maybe there might be.
I know.
Well, I'm just thinking about who they're accountable to, like who they are, and how can we go they said they have a lot of oversight, they have under a lot of oversight.
Yeah.
From who?
Oh, for reduction costs?
Yes.
Transition
To like make sure they can get those funding they need. Because you don't even it's pretty simple for getting that would almost, I mean, that'd be like my road.
I would not have known what he was doing.
feel comfortable with
Keep
this.
going.
It's also like a Friday at noon.
Well, I used to be really nearsighted, and I got LASIK but about 8 months ago, I started to notice that I'd look at my screen for a long time, and I'd look up and my vision would be kind of blurry. I think I need that.
You're asking for it through the mail, so I don't see how
I can't.
That's like how we go about that.
Okay, we'll go ahead and bring everybody back together.
You still get a recommendation. And then I would say, figuring out a project.
Okay, and kind of imagine that this is, we're wrapping up the case interview, sort of your way to sort of close and give your final recommendations. What would you say to the agency? Who would like to go first? Yes.
We'll go first. So, utilizing technology for initial data collection will help us just reduce the need for follow-ups in general. Also, utilizing technology would allow us to combine the local and regional offices and local headquarters, so basically eliminating the whole regional step and just getting that cost out. If we reduce the number of follow-up visits, assuming that the marginal benefit of the last 3 visits, follow-up visits, is quite low, or at least figuring out which follow-up visits we can eliminate, we would be able to theoretically reduce the number of staff doing that by equal proportion. And then, again, saving money on labor and actual like brick and mortar type stuff. So, whole process and then
Great. Anyone else? Can you hear from those groups? Yes.
First thing, the agency should rationalize the process by introducing various technology at various levels. This will reduce the manpower cost and it will reduce the follow-up cost. Second, if it is not willing to go ahead in a big way, it can start with a pilot project. And if it is possible for the agency to diversify its business, then it should look for diversification of its business so that there are more revenue sources which are generated for the agency.
So in like a classic sort of agency scenario where they're doing lots of services, I would say that would be a good answer. I would maybe come back with a question of what do you mean diversify? You've got one mission to basically do census. So just to make sure you're recognizing the context, which is a little bit hard because you have to know U.S. government agencies too when answering, but just make sure you're constantly thinking about what is the mission of this agency and what are they supposed to do, because you don't want to tell them to kind of go do something different than what they're mandated to do. But yep, I think you're right on the same page with technology.
think we generally support moving to a digital collection medium. However, that's contingent on politics, I would say. And I mean, moving the census completely online, I think is a big step. So in lieu of that, just keeping the normal process as it is, we would have a couple different steps. We would first try and improve messaging in various ways, including just how the letter is written. That has shown to be effective in other campaigns. We would have an advertising campaign, social media, just try and get the word out through that way. And then secondly, we would, before the actual follow-ups, because that seems to be the most expensive part of the whole operation, and probably we would need the numbers with the least effective in a marginal sense. We would try and increase phone calls and improve phone call targeting before that step is made, including maybe calling cell phones as well and text messages. And then thirdly, we would try and reduce the size of this bureaucracy by removing the regional offices and just training the local offices at a national level, having maybe all the local officers come to the national headquarters and training them, and then being in direct contact with the national base.
Yeah, so your assumption there is that the regional offices really could be replaced by kind of more of a national...
I assume that, I may ask this question, but that they essentially manage the local office.
Yeah. And I really like the beginning part. So I think we all hit on technology moving digital, but you said, how are we improving in terms of communication to the public on what's happening? What's your communication plan? How are we increasing our effectiveness? I really like that you added in those points, because it's an important piece of this entire puzzle. It's not just your business process. How are you making sure the public is aware of what you're doing so that they're willing to participate too? Yeah.
And I think too, if I heard right, you were not totally phasing the form out right now, right? I think I heard you were going to take a look at it and maybe redesign it. Right. Did I hear that
yes,
right?
That's correct. I mean, that's the way that we're going to collect the information. I don't think we can assume that the census is going to go completely online. I think that's a big...
Yeah, and that's the point I thought exactly that's where you're going. I want to pick one. And we do a lot. I mean, I've done a lot of work with tax agencies, right? And tax agencies' forms are written terrible. My wife's just been doing with Treasury and Treasury Direct program. The instructions are awful. You're never going to deal... never. It's going to be a long time until you can just mandate digital in anything you do. There's always a population that's going to be dealing with, will want paper. It was only going to be comfortable paper. And there's a whole philosophy and methodology around plain language. I don't know if you're aware. We have some folks in the firm who do that. In fact, for my client in Indiana, we just looked at their collections forms to help them determine if they were, one, in compliance with statute, but two, to improve the way they send collection letters out to folks to hopefully get more cash into Department of Revenue, because that's the least costly way that they collect money is by sending the letters out. So I did like that piece, and then you also start to think about the change management component as well.
And even if you can't go digital, using phones more and trying to follow up as well. Yeah. I like thinking outside the box, because there's kind of this ideal situation we want to get to, and there's reality of all the barriers. So what's some other recommendations? Over here?
I just have a question. Mm-hmm. So who exactly is our client? Like, who am I specifically talking to? Like,
when you're interviewing with them? Or?
Well, like, we're supposed to act like this is real. So, like, who is it that I'm...
It's typically like the director of the agency.
And then who are they accountable to directly? Who are they trying to appease?
Let's go back. Well, so Congress? This is the Bureau. Yeah, so Congress, essentially. So this is our initial case. So it's the agency itself that collects data, and essentially it's Congress, right, that holds the purse strings and is holding them accountable. But essentially, you're talking to the agency director itself. Usually, that's clear in the case.
And typically, we'll likely be bringing some state cases. It's a federal case, but I mean, in all the federal cases, Congress is always a stakeholder. So I think you can make some assumptions about who the stakeholders are. But the immediate client, you can always assume is going to be like a deputy director, reasonably senior person who, has engaged you and is interested in your recommendations, it doesn't matter if we call that person a COO or a deputy director or an agency director.
And if that's not clear at the beginning, you can just clarify. Now, are you the agency director? Is this who I'm talking to? Yeah.
I just thought about this. I would analyze the demographics of the people or the households who are not responding to the survey. Maybe there's a language barrier, educational barrier. Maybe they just don't understand form. So making it, maybe making two different forms. So one will be bilingual and there'll be English and then Spanish, and then one will have English and maybe Mandarin, depending on what community those surveys are going out to.
Yeah, or the folks that you're hiring need to be multilingual. Yeah. So it's thinking about all the context of what could possibly be leading to it. Yes.
So I don't know, but if it would be feasible, like from the case, I understand that there are 6 times of follow-up happens when there is a no response. So statistically, can we arrange the data of how much of the data is coming, like how much useful is the 6 times visit, and then we can reduce the visits to 4, 3, or 2. That how much of data actually we get every time more we go back, so that at least that 1 cycle gets reduced or 2 cycle gets reduced. If we can leave and we are ready to lose some data, but that has a better cost implication to us.
Yeah, so that kind of goes back to the very beginning when you're asking questions to say, okay, well, what's the response rate on the 5th or 6th visit? And if they say, actually, we hit just about everybody by our 6th visit, you would never want to give them a recommendation to say, well, stop doing that. But if it's, it's just a marginal gain, that would be a good way. That would then feed into your proposal to say, only do a max of 3. Yeah, so I think you all sort of hit on it. I really do like the answer over here saying, here are some few different ways you can think about it and some steps that you can implement, trying to get to more of a digital era.
I mean, typically our solutions are in that vein. We phase things in. Very rarely does anyone kind of go like big bang. So it's good to think about how you might want to phase things in to increase adoption, not only externally, but even within the agency itself, right?
What would be some barriers to your recommendations to reduce the footprint in the labor force? Yep.
Federal pensions, the incentive of such. So if you're trying to get rid of your older labor force, because of the appeal of digitization, then that hinders some of your process.
I would want to know, is your labor force, are they full-time employees, or do you contract people every 10 years? Because if it's contract employees, you could reduce that number and not really have too many consequences, whereas if you're all full-time employees, that's a much bigger hurdle to overcome. Yeah. Or like leasing space, how much, are we locked into holding all these facilities and stuff too? Just kind of thinking about like the bigger context of all those factors. And being prepared that when you give your recommendation, they say, okay, what are the barriers to that you're thinking through? Here are some potential issues that our clients could face. So, yeah, I think you all kind of hit on it. So, kind of just transitioning into case interviewing tips in general. So hopefully this kind of helped dispel maybe some of the anxiety around what a case interview is like, and really it's just thinking through the process, coming up with some good questions, asking questions, listening. But the number one thing is just listen to your interviewer and ask clarifying questions, so being careful to make assumptions that weren't actually stated. Developing an approach and hypothesis. So I think everybody immediately jumped to the digital being the solution, which I think is where we kind of all got to, but being clear about what are the assumptions you're making along the way and talking through your thought process and formulating recommendations. And then when being asked about the barriers or potential hurdles there, being able to not defend them, but to just be able to rationalize how you got there, and also just to explain, well, yes, I considered that, and I'm assuming X, Y, and Z. And at the end, it's always good to just define the problem and recommended actions, and to explain what you expect to see as a result at the end. Things not to do. Oh, so jumping right into your answer without taking time to think through it first to gather your thoughts. It can be really uncomfortable when you're sitting in an interview and someone's watching you and you're like, can I just have a moment to sit here and jot down thoughts? But your interviewer expects it and wants you to be able to gather your thoughts. Don't do it for 10 minutes and waste half of your time just sitting to yourself and writing. But definitely take a few minutes to kind of jot down whether it's a SWOT analysis or even drawing out people, process, technology. Let me put some thoughts down in each of those buckets. make sure you give yourself that space and time to think through it. Making assumptions without addressing them first with the interviewer and asking clarifying questions. Don't exclusively rely on a framework. So if I'm thinking about reducing costs, don't immediately just say like, well, I want to increase revenues, I want to possibly diversify the portfolio, because for this specific client that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So thinking through, okay, this is helpful, but maybe I need to tweak what I'm going to give them an answer to based on the context of the case. Worrying about the right answer. So again, it's about how do you approach and think through things and being a little bit creative and thinking through all the different aspects of the reality that your client is facing. And fifth, try not to appear flustered or frustrated. Again, I think it's about, can you be in sort of a stressful situation and still maintain your calm? Because it's absolutely critical that when we work with clients, we do provide that sense of calm and direction that they need. They wouldn't hire us if it was an easy problem for them, right? They hire us because they need help and guidance. And so if you kind of freak out, in an interview, I'm not sure that's somebody that I would feel comfortable having at the client site to also represent us and our teams. And from kind of a very junior practitioner level, we've got a lot of folks that really are a main point of contact for a lot of our clients at like a management level. And so you want to make sure it's somebody that, brings a sense of calm, even if internally you're kind of freaking out. It's okay just to like take a breath and realize it's a stressful situation, but there's no reason you can't have fun with it and talk with your interviewer. Anything that you want to add, John or Ollie?
Maybe just embellishing upon number 5 is that, practically, just the way Sadie did the exercise today, we have to read the facts as they are to everybody, and we can only provide additional facts as we have them written. And I've been in many, many interviews where number 5 has been a bit of an issue, in that folks wanted more information, or it seemed as though they thought I had more information, and it really does frustrate them. So we've got to standardize the process. I'd love to make up facts. It's the easiest thing to do. But we have to read the case. We have to give everybody the same information, and we can only give additional facts if you ask the question. If we don't have that, we'll be pretty clear about that, and we're not trying to trick you. But some people that number 5 is difficult in a pressure situation. And the other thing that Sadie did was, in the world of our clients, in an initial interview situation, they don't have all the data either. And to Sadie's point, I have a counselee now who one of the recurring pieces of feedback from that person is he continues to show frustration when clients don't have all the information. And it's impeding this person's progress in the firm because clients pick up on it. It doesn't help the situation at all. So they don't. It takes sometimes months till we get the right information, and sometimes they don't have it, and then we move into making assumptions. So there's a practical piece of that, and really there's the day-to-day piece that we deal with our clients.
Okay, so just key things to remember, and this was really just good advice in general when interviewing. Relax and be yourself. Be a human. Try to remain calm and focused. Expect to be challenged and embrace it. I really think me going into the case interviews with a mindset of, well, we'll see how this goes. I just kind of want to enjoy it and have fun, and this is good practice, helped me to be sort of calm and have a level of confidence that I think in the end served really well. Whereas I do know some of our colleagues stress so much about it that I think it kind of impeded their ability to actually do the case challenge, which is hard. I know everyone kind of has their own stressors and anxiety, and just kind of whatever you need to do to sort of feel calm to go into that is good. And just take a few minutes to compose your thoughts. Don't stress about the awkward silence. Thinking about the outside the box is okay, and to be creative. Now, if your interviewer says irrelevant, then leave it at the door and continue on, but it's okay to kind of think about the whole context. And don't forget to bring scratch paper and pencil. I also did a few basic math problems beforehand just to try and refresh my brain so that I didn't stumble. And of course, I still stumbled during it. But with that, does anyone have specific questions on the actual case interview process itself?
On a slideshow like this, or would it be like handouts or pieces of paper that you could jump back to?
I think it's usually read to
we read. We'll read the facts to you, which is again why that initial step, 100, being able to recite the facts and articulate the business problem is really important.
And writing it down, because honestly, even now, when you go into the data and whatnot, it's easy to forget what you're trying to actually answer. So writing it down and knowing what you're aiming to respond to.
Is the chart also read out?
It depends on what the data is. So usually, if it's that complex, I think sometimes it's given to you, but oftentimes it's just a few figures.
Yeah, usually it's not as involved as that one, and we will just read that. But if it was involved as that one, we have data sheets that we pass across the table. Yeah, and don't be surprised if the interviewer asks you to leave your notes in the room after you leave. We don't really go back and look at them, but sometimes we do use the same cases from year to year, so we trust everyone, but we also know that study guides kind of make their way across students, so we may ask for the notes. So don't bring a super expensive notebook that's found and when you tear the sheet out, you're going to ruin it. So, but we may ask for your notes. I always do.
I strongly encourage everyone to make sure you apply and do your resume and actually go to the interviews themselves if you're invited. Even if you're I'm not sure about consulting. One is, I wasn't sure about consulting, and I'm actually incredibly grateful I chose this career. But two, it's going to put you ahead because then you'll have your resume done. You'll have gone through the process once for when other employers come back this year. So it's good just to get a jump start on that too.
And the more interviewing you do, the better. There's really no downside. I took probably the same approach as Sadie. Consulting really wasn't something I necessarily had thought about, but I knew that I needed to be better at doing interviews because it had been a number of years before I'd interviewed for anything, so it helped. One quick thing, I'll take a step. I know we're not doing behavioral prep, but the block up top around relaxing, being yourself is really important. In the behavioral, we really want to get to know you. I know we're not talking behavioral today, but if you look across the backgrounds of Sadie, Alejandro, and myself, you see probably a lot of diversity. I hope you do. We are not any particular cookie cutter, so we want to get to know you and understand how those unique characteristics that you are bringing to the firm are going to make us better. And this term, I never knew what it meant. It's accretive, right? So it's additive to the firm. We don't want people who look just like us. How are you going to be accretive to the firm? And by relaxing and being yourself, we really get that insight and behavioral piece of the interview.
And make sure you write your resumes to speak to those transferable skills. So in consulting, being able to be flexible and adapt your approach and work on teams and maintain your cool under pressure, there's a ton of different experience out there where you can demonstrate those skills, even if it's not solving government business problems. So kind of on the soft skill side, how do you adapt and work on teams? What are those types of situations? And then also maybe more rigorous skills. If you actually have business process mapping background or data analytics, make sure you're putting that stuff on your resume because those are definitely things that help you stand out. My other piece of advice is make sure, so don't just say, well, I'm really good at time management or just kind of putting out a fact, but also having some sort of story to demonstrate those. Or I remember one of the questions I got was, give me an example of a time you had conflict with another colleague. And how did you solve that? Something along those lines. And I had never gotten that question in an interview before. Now on the other side, I'm like, oh my gosh, we work on teams all the time, but if you can't handle interpersonal conflict in an effective manner, that's going to be a huge detriment to your success in consulting. So thinking through how do I handle conflict, when I work on teams. Also, a time when you led a team to success or been a part of a team. Being able to just kind of give examples that highlight your skills and ability to work effectively on teams is critical.
I would also say approach the interviews. Obviously, we want to get to know you, but approach it also as a way to get to know us, right? You'll have senior leadership that's here that you get to talk to. So use it as a way to also get to know the firm. I think Deloitte's pretty cool. I think there's a lot of cool people that we work with, and I really enjoy that. So take advantage of that opportunity, get to know us, make sure that we're a good fit for what you're looking for as well, as we get to know you.
And to give you the hard sell. So I really didn't know any difference between consulting firms when I joined, and I kind of was like, okay, this is great, sure, Deloitte. But Deloitte, if you go look us up, we get a ton of accolades on being, I think we just won a top 100 best places for working mothers. We're always in the top like diversity and inclusion firms, best places to work, and that we really have strong values of inclusiveness, diversity. And I've been impressed since I joined the firm just how much our leadership speaks those values in the employees, and also just the folks that they bring in from sort of schools as well. I've been incredibly impressed with the diversity of background and interesting experiences. And I worked with one person who had a complete theater background, and it was just like, oh, how did you make your way here? So don't think that just because I don't have a standard cookie cutter resume, that that doesn't mean you don't have applicable skills to help you be successful here.
I'll echo that. I mean, the firm does, it's a hard job, right? Like the firm does require a lot of you, but they are from like your direct manager who's like overseeing just like you and maybe a couple other work threads to like leadership of like the whole public sector. When you really need it, they do get behind you, and they do care about your progression as a professional and the personal level, and making sure that you're handling both of those correctly. So I would agree that it's a very good place to work.
I remember when I got the offer and I was like, oh, I never viewed myself as going to work for corporate America. I don't know what this means. I view myself as a public servant. I've always been a nonprofit. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And I remember talking to one other Maxwell grad who worked for Deloitte, and he said, absolutely, you should take it. If nothing else, you'll put in a couple of years and your professional skills will just grow astronomically. But then too, that it really is a place of very like interesting people, and you get to solve client problems. And so these were the agencies I wanted to work for, and you're just doing it at a different level than if you came in and worked for the agency itself. And one of the things I've kind of grown to really appreciate about a professional services firm is that, you know, we do have technology components too, but really our people are what we sell. Like, our investment in our consulting practices rely on the skills and knowledge of our practitioners. So there's so many growth opportunities, courses, certifications that Deloitte gives folks that I feel like the investment I've gotten over the last 3 years, I haven't seen a lot of that same thing. A lot of my friends from Maxwell that have taken sort of other jobs too. Now everyone kind of follows a different pathway, but I've learned to really appreciate that piece of sort of the professional services side of working in corporate America.
Yeah, for sure. They recognize that like the success of the firm is predicated on our success as individuals, and they make very big investments in that area. And,
yeah. So that's a hard sell, but it's up to everybody to decide what you want to do. Any other just general questions about consulting or Deloitte or anything? Yeah.
I wanted to know more information about timeline.
I have a slide on that. Great. So resume drops are the 20th, which is 2 weeks from now. And then folks will be invited for a first round of interviews, and we'll have some optional case prep one-on-one for the 30th through the 1st, if you're invited for that first round of interviews, which will be on, I believe it's November 2nd. And then if you're invited back for a second round, it'll be on November 3rd.
All of that will happen through our office, as the resumes will be submitted to us through the system and then through the Deloitte application. The interviews will happen here on campus in our office, so it all happens here.
Typically, when are decisions made by?
We, coming out of the interviews on the 3rd, as a sponsor for the school and alum, we will have our recommendations, and then I present the recommendations directly to the public sector S&O leadership, we have pretty good success rate in getting them through. So there will be a bit of a lag between November and when you hear. I mean, coming out of here, I'm going to plane ride home. I'll know who I want to give offers to. It'll take a bit of time for us. Now we don't go to millions of schools for MPA recruiting, so it'll be reasonably quick. I think in the past we always and Kelly, you probably know better than I, because I lose track over the 18 years. Usually by the end of the year, because I know Sadie and I talked in December when you got your offer, and I was trying to do the hard sell on Sadie.
It took a while.
It really did. Yeah. Sadie's not going to sign. But I typically they're out before the end of the calendar year, I thought, right?
Yeah.
And one other thing I'll mention now, because there's not a recruiter beside me, is we also realize that you may have like some government options. Some of the government programs if if you're pondering something that's you're really passionate about in government or nonprofit sector, we've given some extensions to allow you to ponder those. Not so inclined to give an extension if you're thinking about going to McKinsey. But otherwise, we have in the past worked with some folks who really had some really hard decisions to make about two very different types of offers.
In a normal situation, what would be the top? How much time would you allow us to decide?
I don't know. I'm not an HR person. I mean, it's at least a few weeks, if not a month, I would think. You have your offers more recent than I.
They usually have like EYO, right? I think they still do that, or they call it something different. So they usually have some way, they give you the offer and they have some sort of, either they fly, like you go to the office, or someone comes here and like you have more opportunities to like talk to people who are in the firm. Outside of like just the three of us.
The timing, was it 1 month?
It was about a month.
It was about a month. Yeah, it's about a month. Okay. Yeah, we don't ask you to sign like in a couple of weeks, but a month is a fair amount of time too. But we do, to Alejandra's point, we do try and get folks to offices, and so that you can interact with colleagues and peers. To echo Alejandra's point, I mean, use what's left in today and during the interviews to kind of get to know us as well, because as much as we're interviewing, it's not really cliche to say you're interviewing us as well, because we're all alums and we don't want anyone to join and have a bad experience with the firm, right? So, and the firm may not be the right place for everybody. So make sure that you take the time to kind of get to know us. You could very well work on a team with the three of us. I'd love to work with these two. It'd be quite a power team if I could get them together in the same team. But yeah.
And consulting isn't for everyone. I didn't know what it was, but I figured out I love to problem solve and I love to have new challenges, so it's fit really well, but we travel a lot for work. So sometimes that doesn't fit well with people's life, depending on what else they have going on. So just making sure you're thinking through all of those aspects as well. I will say one of the things I'm most impressed about is people do leave the firm after a few years. I've never had someone leave who said it was because of the firm. It was always because of something else happening in their life that forced them to choose a different option, which for me is huge, that people leave and they still have good things to say about Deloitte. And I would say that's kind of unique to our firm as well.
Yeah. I have a couple of reminders. I know it clearly states it up there, but be sure to apply through our system in addition to the website. That's what we're going to package and send to everyone. So if it's not there, it's not, officially complete. And please work with us through every step of the process. We're happy to look at resumes, cover letters, practice interview stuff. You really can't inundate us too much. Please be visiting us often through this process and throughout the whole year, but here in particular.
Any other questions?
Before we wrap, I would really want to thank all of you for coming, and I want to thank Career Services for probably close to 18 years. They have dealt with us giving them a call, sometimes on really short notice, and accommodating our crazy requests. But we have a great relationship with Career Services. Everything Laura said is absolutely true. Work with them. They are fantastic. I had no idea how to write a resume when I got here, and I had a whole lot of red over my first one, but it was phenomenal advice. But both in the help they give you and the support they've given us over the years, it's fantastic. And also want to thank Sadie and Alejandro. I hope New Hampshire and Georgia are still running today without them. Thanks. But really, thank you for taking time. 2 days out of 4 6 hours out of your time. I know it's a lot of time to invest, but really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you all. Thank you.